Welcome back to Beyond Well with Sheila Hamilton. I'm here with my co-hosts, Dr. Brian Goff and Dr. Jenna Lejeune. Hi, you two.
Hello. Happy Monday.
Summertime. I am going to sing the praises of vacation for a moment. You know, I was never one of those people that even took my vacation time. And this last week, I absolutely needed it after a week in the hospital with my daughter.
Yeah.
And I had the kind of experience that I'm sure most people actually take, where they do nothing. I just let my brain sort of offload, and I swear to God, I could feel the DNA coming back. It's almost like I was repurposing my brain. You know?
For me, at least, when I go on vacations, it takes me a couple of days to sort of slow my metabolism.
Yeah.
A little bit, my mental metabolism.
Totally.
And then, the last day, I start thinking about what I'm coming back to. So I get on a week's vacation, I feel like I get about 4
day and a half.
Sweet. Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Just a few sweet days in there. Oh God, this is what it feels like to put everything down.
But we were talking about this, Jenna, about how do we as human beings begin to weave in these mini breaks for our brains.
Right, yeah.
And as part of my dedicated attention to holding on to some of the vacation vibe, I am going to increase the amount of meditation I do from 15 minutes to 30, because I honestly think I got a little okay, now it's time to meditate. Okay, ding, the meditation is over.
I thought you were just going to commit to a daily diet of Mai Tais and chocolate-covered macadamia nuts.
I would be 370 pounds, but, that wouldn't really matter.
Okay.
I'd still be happy, right?
This morning, that's so funny, because this morning during meditation, I must not have been super mindful, because we always meditate for 30 minutes, and I'm like, oh my God, it's got to have been 30 minutes. Has to have been 30 minutes. And finally I said to my partner, I was like, Jason, I think your phone isn't working. It's not working. He's like, you still have 2 minutes.
The longest 2 minutes.
It was the longest 30 minutes of meditation ever today. I don't know what was happening.
But it's like in soccer, though. It's stoppage time, 10 seconds.
It was.
Because Jenna killed my buzz.
Yeah.
It was. I'm like,
You can feel like that.
I feel like I needed to restart my 30 minutes.
I do, though, just believe that I looked at my phone and my screen time was down by 65%, which I think was part of the reason that I actually helped my brain a little bit. And my happiness index, I swear, was up 75%. So there's some correlation there.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And partly the reason I wanted to come back was because I was so excited to meet Sharma Shields.
Oh, thank you, Sheila.
Honestly, so I didn't know anything about you. Our past intern, Ari, was the person who turned me onto your writing. Your book, Favorite Monster, The Sasquatch Hunter's Almanac, and now The Cassandra, is generating a ton of buzz in Portland. And I think you probably write for a generation of young readers. And that's the reason that Pals is going to be sold out tonight. So welcome to our podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
First of all, you live in Washington, and so your obsession with Sasquatch is normal, correct?
Right, exactly.
It's like a mythical beast that is sort of back in Indian lore and in fishing lore and in a lot of people's imaginations from the region where you live.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a part of indigenous lore and with the Spokane and Colville tribes since long before white settlers came to the area.
Yeah.
So I have been writing about mythological creatures for a really long time. My story collection, Favorite Monster, has, a Cyclops working at a PR firm in Seattle, and Medusa growing up next door to someone in Spokane. And so I was finding that I was both setting stories locally within the inland Northwest, but then also they had this mythological edge. So when I started looking into writing a novel, I thought I wanted to bring that mythology a little bit closer to home.
Yeah.
And that's where kind of I started researching Sasquatch and researching cryptozoologists who were interested in Sasquatch around the Spokane area. And really the book came from that. But also it's more than a book about Sasquatch. It's a family drama, and it's very much based on my own interpersonal relationships with my family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait. Sasquatch is mythical? You don't write about the Loch Ness Monster, do you? This is really disappointing for me.
Well, I think that's a good thing to say, that, it may not be mythical. It could
Just
be
sneaky.
Yeah.
Just a sneaky little son of a...
Yeah.
Cassandra is a book about a woman, and her fate and her story is so dark.
It is.
And you come in and you're like one of the sunniest, most beautiful, cheery women ever. And I was like, how the heck do you get to such a dark place?
Yeah. Well, I will say that I do appear as a very smiley, upbeat, optimistic person. But that really is not at all who I am on the inside. And I think I do expend quite a lot of energy putting that really sunny personage on. I wear it almost like a mask, and I've done that my whole life in some ways. But I have always been attracted to darkness. I think one reason I loved Greek mythology as a girl was because I loved how dark the endings were. They were not a Disney-style ending. They frequently, heroes would succeed, but then the story would follow it through to the end where they would die miserable and alone. And that seemed really truthful to me as a girl. And, when I started writing the Cassandra, I was thinking about my multiple sclerosis, which I was diagnosed with about 6 years ago. And a lot of people in the Spokane area had said to me, well, we have a really high incidence of MS in our region because we're downwind of Hanford. And I had been thinking about writing a really dark book, not unlike Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. And I thought, oh, well, I've been looking for a setting. Hanford would be perfect for that. But of course, when I started researching Hanford, I became really interested in some of the disturbing things that I read about Hanford, particularly when it was being created in 1944 and 1945, when the majority of the workforce had no idea what they were doing, what they were making there. They knew it was for the war effort. They knew that it held some sort of promise of being the thing that could change the outcome of the war, but they were otherwise unaware that what they were creating was a weapon of mass destruction that was going to kill 200,000 more people in Japan, and then also cause a lot of pollution and strange birth defects
in the water.
And everything within the inland Northwest area.
Jenna, I want to talk about embracing your dark side. I think it's fascinating that you can have somebody who, like Sharma, who can be in the world like this and then not only acknowledges this dark shadow, but actually goes into it for art and for purpose and to actually say something.
Yeah, I think that is a really important lesson for us all to learn. We sort of have these ideas that there's this one story of us. Oh, I'm like this. I'm this kind of person. And we can kind of turn ourselves into these caricatures, oh, I'm the bright, sunny, happy person, or I'm the whatever. And humans are such complicated critters. Like, none of us is this caricature. And so when we are able to explore and be curious about, without judgment, all these different aspects of ourselves, we can learn so much from it. And one of the ways I think about this is, the word integrity, or living with integrity. Integrity means wholeness. And so when I think about living a life of integrity, it means living your whole self. The dark side, the bright, shiny side, the side that's kind of flat. And that, to me, is part of what kind of having a life of integrity means.
Yeah. When Sharma is speaking to so many young people, and there's already so much agitation, fear, paranoia about what's happening in the environment, how do you want your readers, and then I'd like you guys to respond, how do we take all of this information about how difficult it is right now to be a human in this world and go forward in a way that's still positive and hopefully fruitful?
Well, I think a lot about, when I think about my novel, The Cassandra in particular, and how dark of a book it is. Sometimes I feel like I really did write that dark because I do care deeply for humanity.
Yeah.
I care for our environment. And I wrote the book almost with the idea that it would grab onto people's shoulders and kind of shake them and make them understand that for me, I think becoming a better human, and I loved what you said about integrity, I think becoming a better human involves assessing the ways in which we have hurt others, both interpersonally and on a more global political level, and hurt ourselves as well. And how can we use those sort of those grievous faults against one another to make ourselves better people, kinder people, more open-hearted people, and evolve into something healthier. That sounds really ambitious, I guess, for a novel to do.
It is ambitious. And I haven't read the book, so do you step your character through that process of redemption?
I do believe that she comes out with an idea of redemption toward the end, but she is shaken to her core.
As we all are.
And she she deals with a very hefty amount of trauma, and a man who assaults her, and she ends up assaulting someone as well.
Oh.
So she is both, I think, the victim of a predator and becomes a predator.
Not
in
an
her own
unusual
right.
story
Yeah.
either.
Yeah. So, and a lot of the book was about how the harms we enact, a lot of times after we absorb them, we turn around and do the harming to someone else.
No kidding.
So-
Brian, speak to that idea because of I talk to so many kids who are so freaked out about the environment, what's happening to our country, that they don't really even want to participate in building a life for themselves. They're just there's a feeling of nihilism.
Yeah, like the problems are so huge. What can I do about it?
Yeah.
I can't get any traction. The story, it's a well-worn story, but the person who sees a whole bunch of starfish that have washed up on the beach, as far as they can see, 100,000 of them or whatever, and they're out there picking up a starfish and tossing it back in the water, and somebody comes and says, "Why are you bothering to do this? You will not be able to save all of them." And he picks the next starfish up and says, "Do you think this one cares?"
Oh, wow. That's
Right.
a great story.
And it's this, like so many of the problems that we're confronted with in this world on the environmental level, which just seems enormous. And then, nationally, some of the things that are going on here in America are so beyond my reach and beyond my pay grade. But what I can pay attention to is noticing how I feel when I see those things and letting that inform me about how I want to move around in the world and interact with the people that I get to interact with. It may seem simplistic, but how I move around in the world and behave and treat other people is the thing that is within my reach.
Yeah.
And the other thing, Sharma, that you were saying that I was appreciating was we can have this tendency, and we've talked about this in other places in the podcast, we can have this tendency to sort of look at other as, oh, they're the perpetrator, bad one, dark source, something like that. And it's completely separate from me. Like, you're absolving yourself of all responsibility. But when you can turn inward and explore those parts of you, how you have hurt others, how you have contributed to whatever the harm is, I think in that lies the hope. Right?
Yes, I think so too.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
You are not just you're so multifaceted in terms of the things that you have on your plate. Mother of two, right? You're dealing with MS, former addict, correct?
That's right. Yep.
And
I've been sober about 6-7 years now. Yeah.
You are so open with all of these. Walk me through the process about why you decided to share your whole self as mother, author, MS survivor, all of the things that you are.
Well, I have to say, I was asked recently, I gave a discussion at a place in Spokane called Spark Central, and they do this Taproot speaker presentation, and they asked me to come and talk. And basically, the Taproot, you tell people kind of your life story. And so I talked about all of that. I talked about my MS. I talked about my drinking and how my last night of drinking, I was blacked out, driving drunk with my kids in the car. And, which is still like one of the most horrifying things to admit to myself, let alone talk about. And I talked about this. I got in a lot of trouble when I was 17 years of age and ended up lying to quite a few people, including reporters and cops and the like, and ended up in this public shaming thing because of it. And so I talked about all of that really openly. And then someone at the end raised her hand and said, "How are you able to be so vulnerable in front of all of us?" And I told her I'm not interested in really being the opposite of vulnerable. I really want to open myself up to people because I really do want to live with what I've done very openly and honestly, not just because I believe I can become a healthier, better person. I also find it really fascinating and interesting, which I think is maybe the writer in me a little bit. Like
objectively, I have a great story.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
And I also know there's a lot of younger women who are writers and younger men too, or even women my own age and older who come to my readings and are just getting started, maybe submitting their short stories, and I know, like me, they may seem very smiley and happy and successful, but I think a lot of us are struggling with depression. And so I'm open with people about, I see a therapist. I have had to be on antidepressants. I need to make sure that I exercise as much as I can because if I don't, I can feel myself slipping. I still have panic attacks every now and then, and I still feel like I'm learning about myself and learning about my darkness. And I'm sure there are certain things that I need to work on and improve that I haven't even seen yet. But I do find it exciting to get to know myself in this way.
Yeah.
And I probably do plumb my own faults quite a lot when I'm writing characters because I want them to seem very alive on the page and vulnerable too, because I think, I don't know, stoicism and, perfectionism are completely boring to me. I'm just not interested in
we're
those.
Not stories that are like, everything I'm really good at. I just win.
I'm just winning.
I just keep winning.
Tired.
And it's like everything I touch turns to gold.
That sounds like our president.
But generally,
that's
it's true. But generally, it's like we're not really interested in those stories.
No,
I don't really like that person very much.
No.
And when the person asks you, how do you be so vulnerable? How do you just like come here and admit to all of that stuff? I don't hear that as a holier than thou question, like how dare you show your face?
No, I don't think
it's
she
more
meant
like,
it that way.
How do you do that? Because I
I'd
want
like
to be able to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, shame is one of the fundamental human emotions, and shame drives us to hide. And the antidote is, here I am.
Yeah.
I mean, we hide from ourselves. We hide from the people that we love and who ostensibly love us, although they love us for who we show ourselves to be, maybe not so much for all the other parts. And we want that, right? But we're not going to have intimacy and acceptance if we aren't vulnerable.
Yeah.
Well, your way of talking about that is really inspiring to me. You talk about that you're still learning about yourself, and you talk about getting to know in this way, like as if you were meeting this person, this friend, this person who you really wanted to like, oh, I want to get to know you more. I want to learn more about you, versus the way that so often we're told to like, you got to figure yourself out. You got to fix yourself. You got to fix it. Like we problem solve ourselves. Yeah. And what a terror. Like, could you imagine hanging out with somebody all day who was just trying to like solve the problem of you?
Right.
It'd be terrible.
Right? I've said in the past to to some of my clients, chief among the problems that you have is that you think you have so many problems.
Yeah. Yeah. Versus simply, it's not a matter of, oh, I have nothing I struggle with or nothing, that, whatever I've done wrong. It's simply your posture is, oh, I want to learn more about this so that then I can move forward rather than I got to fix it. I got to do it right and better. And
isn't that cool? Because if you take that approach, then the whole becoming better is really kind of almost like stop trying to become better and just and just be like, well, this is who I am. And I'm not pursuing these things so that I can finally be worthy or finally be a better human, but just so that I can live life in a way that I enjoy more. It's more meaningful.
So I want to come back to something Sharma said that really resonated with me when she said, there's this memory I have of me driving drunk with my 2 kids in the back of the car. And I think anyone who's ever parented has that moment. Mine was, I was getting my daughter ready for a walk and she was in the stroller. And I went into the thing where we keep the water bottles, and she had pushed back from the stroller and was headed down our driveway backwards.
Wow.
And she would have smashed into a truck if not from my neighbor who was fixing his bike and flew himself in front of the stroller and stopped her. I still have the experience of that memory. It's visceral. It comes up, and I am shaken for hours afterwards. How do you cope with the things that you did, the mistakes that you made, where you were when you're still trying to get to know yourself and be more accepting of yourself today? Walk me through your process, and then I'd like to have you guys talk about how you help clients deal with those almost, I'm going to put shame around it for me.
Yeah.
Like, what the hell was I doing?
Right. Well, I've had issues with drinking. The very first time I ever drank, I blacked out. And horrifyingly, I don't have a memory of it driving home with my kids in the car because I was blacked out. But I have the memory of waking up in the morning. My husband, I could tell, was extremely disappointed. I was so sick that I spent the entire day in the bathroom and just, I think, was feeling such an intense amount of self-hatred as I was getting sick over and over again. And that disgust and self-hatred was such a major part of my life as I was drinking because no matter what I did, sometimes I would take a break for 3 months from drinking to try to get a hold of it, or I would tell myself I'm only going to drink 1 day this week, or I would tell myself I'm only going to have 2 beers, but I could never stick to those things that I would promise myself I would do, because once I took a sip of alcohol, all my inhibitions were out the window and I just didn't care anymore. I think I really gunned for the blacking out because it was a way to silence my mind. I have a very active mind that is very self-critical, and anyone who reads my books knows that criticism is there with my characters too. I mean, they're all they're all deeply flawed, and they're all trying to figure themselves out in their books. And I think, honestly, the most cathartic thing has been that I quit. That when I go down a road of how could I do this to my own children who I cherish and love more than anything, I think, well, but you stopped. That was the moment when you stopped. You finally, because it seemed like it didn't matter how much I hurt myself with the drinking, but it really did matter that I had involved them. And sometimes I still marvel over how much I must love them. I mean, this unconditional, wild, interplanetary amount that I love them that actually was the motivating factor in my finally quitting drinking, which had been such a problem for so long. But honestly, I think sometimes I'm extremely awkward and not at all graceful with being kind to myself. I still can get into horrible self-talk and getting down on myself really easily. And a lot of that happens, and maybe some of you can talk about some of this, because I've been curious about how some of that happens, especially when I look back, when I think about awful memories. And I pick up all of the times that I wronged somebody, or that I let myself down by how I mistreated somebody, and I lump them all together, and I'm like, here's the evidence that I am this terrible person.
Oh, wow.
You know, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Go.
Fix me. Just kidding.
Well, I think you're the only person that struggles with self-criticism.
Yeah.
So that's unusual.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just because you're a bad person.
Right. It must be.
I knew it.
must-
Yeah,
Yeah.
there we are. No, actually, I was, Sheila said, well, then you guys are going to speak to it. So my mind is starting to click on, okay, what am I going to say? And as I'm listening to your response to facing what you had done, you're checking off these things that I'm thinking of. Like, we hurt about the things that we care about. So your guilt and your shame over this act informs how much you love your kids. Because if you didn't care so much about taking care of them, what happened wouldn't bother you as much. Right?
Yeah.
And then also, I think, to a degree, I mean, from an evolutionary standpoint, our emotions are around to help us out. The function of guilt is to get our behavior back in line with what we care about. Not what's right and what's wrong, but what we care about, or our values, right? Mm-hmm. And so you said the most productive thing that I did was I quit.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, my emotional response to what happened has served its purpose. I've got myself back in line I've got myself facing in the direction of my values, and I can go ahead and put this down. The problem is that the mind likes to tell stories, and it hangs on to those stories like forever.
Yeah.
And at least for me, the stories that I have about myself, when I hand pick bits of my life that confirm my story, I'm like, see?
Yes.
And
yeah.
then when a few other bits of my life sort of sneak in there that counter the story, I'm like, oh,
Well, they're not as
Yeah.
important.
that didn't count.
Yeah.
Anybody would have
Yes,
done that.
yeah,
Yeah.
I do that
Blind
too.
squirrel found a nut. That kind of thing, right? And it's like we're not really being fair assessors of any of that, right? The stories are just really, really old. And at least from the perspective that Jenna and I work, people spend so much time, and I want to say this respectfully, but I mean, people spend so much time staring at their navels trying to rewrite the stories. And then because we're not perfect people, we go about life, we do some things that don't really fit how we want to be living, and the story snaps right back like it never went away. Like, see? And it's more about seeing the story as a story that we tell ourselves than trying to muck around with the content and convince ourselves that no, that's all completely wrong and I'm a wonderful person.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, one of the interesting relationships between self-criticism and shame, and this is actually an area we do research around at our clinic, so it's something I'm super interested in. One of the theories is that self-criticism serves the function of trying to protect us from shame. So it's sort of the mind's way of, if I can just beat myself up enough, then I won't do the thing again that is so shameful, because shame is probably the most painful human emotion that we feel. It's this very, very visceral. We will get kicked out of the tribe if that's where shame evolutionary comes from, we think. And so self-criticism is like your mind's really not so helpful, but well-intentioned attempt of I'm just going to keep reminding you of how terrible you felt when you did all these things.
So you don't do
so
it
you
again.
don't do them again.
Yeah.
And what we try and do is actually help people be willing to feel the shame so that the self-criticism can kind of subside. There's no function for it anymore. And then you get to choose how you want to be, not because you're beating yourself up, but because that's the kind of mom you want to be.
Can I interject though that when you allow yourself to feel the shame, it's feeling it and having those thoughts show up as they are, not as
Yes.
they say they
yes.
are.
Thanks, Brian.
It isn't so
Perfect.
much like sitting here
Yeah.
and being like, I just have to really come to terms with I'm a
Right.
piece of shit.
No.
And
No,
I'll-
that's
and
the
I'll be sad, right?
self-criticism. That's the self-criticism.
Right.
I'm a piece of shit.
So let's go
Yeah,
through
yeah.
what is the
Yeah.
function. Are you asking people to be in their body and actually just feel that the memories evoking that night, she's going through everything, she feels it all the way through her body? What are you doing functionally in the room?
I mean, this is the difference between, I don't know if this is right on point, but this is the difference between having a good self-esteem, like I'm a wonderful person, I'm a good person, and self-compassion.
Right. Yeah. So like being able to sit with the shame, like as a clinician, of course I would never want to shame my clients. But if my clients are feeling shame, then what I want them to be able to do is to feel their experience from a place of compassion and a place of like, oh, that is so painful to feel like I did something that like really risked the things that were most important to me, right?
Yeah.
And from a place of kind of like you said, learning about yourself versus judging and harshing yourself about it. And then from that place, from this de-blaming platform, then we can start making better choices about the kinds of life you would choose to live.
Yes.
Versus, oh my gosh, because that's the problem with self-criticism, right? Like many people feel like, oh, if I let go of my self-criticism, I'm just going to go to hell in a handbasket and do all these terrible things,
Well, it's
right?
It's interesting because when I talk to my therapist, the work we do repeatedly over and over is her asking me to feel things without judgment, to sit and feel. And I have to say, even after being in therapy for so many years, I have a really hard time of letting go because I do think I'm not quite sure how to not like intellectualize that shame because I am terrified to feel it. And I can even as you're talking, I can feel my bones twisting.
Same.
Twisting.
Like my blood is so hot and every pore is open because I'm just
and maybe
reliving
that's the shame.
Yeah.
coming.
Well, and
I know.
And I think when that stuff starts to come up, it activates some of the stories.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And this means that I'm a terrible person. And so much of the time, right, when we think about the times in which we've moved away from how we want to be, that adds evidence to us being awful. And then when we think about moving in the direction of our values, then it's like, and then I will be a better person. And it really isn't about becoming a better person or being a worse person. It's just living in resonance with this is how I want to move around in the world.
Mm-hmm.
I just wish, I have a nephew who struggles mightily with drug addiction, and every time he falls off the wagon again, it's like, oh, I'm a terrible person and I wasted your money in rehab and I'm so sorry. I don't even deserve your attention. And I was like, those stories aren't helpful anymore.
Right, because what's the best thing to do to get rid of that self-criticism? To use, right? Like that's what makes
Exactly.
it go away.
Right.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
I do these things. I'm a bad person. What do bad people do?
They
these
use.
things.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so just the loop, even the shift of, oh, God, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that you were in such a vulnerable place that you did that again. What can we do to not put ourselves in a vulnerable place? Like a mind shift.
Yeah.
A shift like I asked him, please, could you see yourself as your 3-year-old and just make decisions for that 3-year-old for a day.
And
a day, then build another day.
Yeah.
And I'm not a therapist, but that felt like something I could offer,
And most humans, the majority of humans' response to another human who is displaying shame is actually to be pro-social towards that person. So it's actually to kind of approach that person and kind of welcome them back in, try and support them in some way.
Wow.
The kind of typical human tendency towards somebody who is in a place of criticism, whether that's self-criticism or other criticism, is, whoa, I'm just backing away from
That is
from
really
you.
true.
Isn't
That's
it?
really
yeah.
interesting.
So even
Yeah.
if you're just talking about how could you be in a place with yourself in that place of shame where you're going to access those parts that are, oh, you are suffering. How can we do something to help you in your suffering? Versus, yeah, you're a piece of shit. I want to get
Wow.
away from you.
Right.
I could talk with you all day, Sharma.
I know, this has been really
I'm
wonderful. I feel like I'm
so-
learning a ton.
I'm
so thank you.
Well, listen to our podcast. We do this every week.
That's wonderful.
You see why I came back from vacation, right? Your talk is at Powell's at 7:00.
I think it's 7:30.
7:30?
Yeah.
Get there
Check
at
the
7.
website. I can't
Get there
remember. I
at
think
7
it's
if you want to
7:30.
see Sharma Shields. Thanks
Yeah.
again so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.